Why this tape was locked away for decades is. It began with a quiet knock on a metal door just after midnight, the kind of soft, embarrassed tapping that makes a night shift officer glance up and wonder if they imagined it. The archives room at the Mill County Sheriff's Office sat at the end of a dim corridor where the vending machines hummed and the fluorescent lights buzzed like tired cicadas. Deputy Mark Doyle had the key. He'd been told to keep the door closed unless someone from records was with him, but that night, a dispatcher slid him a note that said, a homeowner on Buckhorn Road had found an old VHS tape in a box of junk taken from an estate sale. The homeowner said there were voices on it. He said the tape knew his name. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? Doyle wasn't the superstitious type. He took the cardboard shoebox from the man who waited on the bench outside the bullpen, a guy who kept wringing his baseball cap and glancing toward the empty hallway like something might step into view at any second. The address on the receipt tucked in the box matched the old Hanley property out by Pine Hollow, a farmhouse everyone in the county knew for one reason or another. Teenagers dared each other to shine headlights at its hollow windows at night. Hunters used the overgrown pasture as a landmark. Years ago, a missing person search had used that house as a staging area for one long, cold week. Snow fell, search dogs whined, nothing was resolved. Doyle carried the box into archives, flipped the light, and breathed in that dry, papery air that always smelled like stapled reports and lost time. Steel shelves marched in rows. A portable television on a wheeled cart sat in a corner beside a VCR the department kept for old evidence. He could have logged the tape and gone home. He could have sealed it, labeled it, done everything exactly by the book. Instead, the quiet got to him. The knowledge that he could dismiss a frightened man's worry with a simple, ordinary glance at ordinary static tempted him like a dare whispered in a crowded bar. He lifted the tape from the box. The plastic felt heavier than it should have, cool as if it had come from a refrigerator. Along the edge, someone had written in block letters with a thick marker, "Do not watch." Doyle smiled despite himself, that crooked grin people wear when they plan to disobey a childlike warning. He slid the cassette into the VCR, turned on the TV, and waited for snow to fill the screen, for dead air to hiss, for nothing to happen so he could shrug and clock out. The picture rolled once, twice, then steadied. A murky grayscale image formed, bleary at first, then startlingly clear. The frame showed a living room with a low ceiling and narrow windows. Lace curtains, a braided rug, a cabinet with a radio the size of a suitcase, a calendar tacked to the wall by the kitchen door, the page flipped to a month. Doyle couldn't make out because of glare from a lamp. It looked like the past, not just in the decor, but in the way the air itself seemed thick, as if the room were underwater. The timestamp in the corner was broken into nonsense, the digits dissolving and reforming like frost. No one spoke. No one walked through the frame. For a long minute, the camera just looked. Doyle leaned closer. The lens seemed to be placed at chest height near a doorway, angled slightly down, not on a tripod exactly, but on something stable. The room felt intact, clean, lived in, not abandoned. Then a sound rose, faint as breath on glass. It was not words, not yet, more like a murmur between floorboards. Doyle frowned and reached for the volume knob with a slow hand, as if a loud movement might startle whatever he was hearing. When the voices resolved, they didn't feel like actors captured on tape. They felt like people very near the microphone, speaking in low, urgent tones to a child. A man said, "Hush." A woman said, "Look at me." The child replied with a small, broken no, not like defiance, but like a plea. The camera did not turn. It stared at the empty room, and somewhere just out of frame, someone began to cry quietly. Not the chest-shaking sobs of panic, but the restrained, frightened weeping of someone trying not to be heard. Doyle's mouth went dry. He checked the box for a note, for a label, for anything that might explain what the homeowner had really brought him. He found nothing but a receipt with the estate sale address and a second piece of paper folded twice that smelled faintly, unbelievably, like storm-damp earth. On that paper, written in a narrower hand, were 4 words. If you value sleep. The picture fluttered. The camera wasn't moving, but something in the light shifted like the room had inhaled. Doyle touched the screen with his fingertips and felt static buzz against his skin. The lens appeared to change focus without any mechanical sound, as if it were choosing where to look. At the edge of the braided rug, a small shadow lengthened, the sort of soft, feathered shape you'd expect from a lamp. Only the lamp's shadow should have leaned away from the lamp. This one drew toward it, like something beyond the frame was changing the angle of light in a way that made no physical sense. Doyle murmured an involuntary, "Hey," and stepped back. Another voice came from off-camera, older, brittle, words like dried leaves. "You can't make it let go," it said. "Not now, not after this long." The child's small voice said something that the microphone didn't catch, and the older voice replied, "It will learn you. It always learns you." On instinct, Doyle reached for the remote. He wanted to stop it, not because of what he saw, but because of what his body felt, a faint vibration in the floor that could have been his own pulse until he realized it was syncing with the soft thump coming from the television. He hit pause. The image froze on a mid-tone gray frame. The thump continued, steady, spaced like footsteps on stairs. He ejected the tape with a shaky forefinger and pinched the cassette between the pads of his fingers as if it might sting him. He wrote an evidence label in block letters, sealed the tape in a bag, and carried it to a shelf at the very back where old burglary photos and mold-smelling diaries sat without attention. He locked the cage and told himself he'd call records in the morning, he'd call the homeowner, he'd pass this on like any other odd but harmless item. Then he turned off the lights and stood in the doorway longer than he meant to, listening with a sort of childish dread for the sound of the television clicking on by itself. It stayed dark. He laughed under his breath, a thin, embarrassed sound, and went home in the gray hour before dawn. He did not sleep. The tape might have gathered dust there if not for a flood in the basement 2 weeks later that forced the department to move stacks of files into the hallway. While shifting boxes, an archivist with a neat desk and a quiet manner named Lena Cotton saw the words on the label and felt a ripple of something she couldn't name. She had grown up near Pine Hollow. She remembered the search parties that trudged through the fields with fluorescent vests and hand warmers tucked in their gloves. She also remembered, more faintly, that her grandmother used to stop speaking when the Hanley property was mentioned, as if the house itself could overhear you. Lena did not believe in curses. She believed in chain of custody forms, in signatures that didn't smudge, in lists that balanced. Yet that night, with the basement pump whining and the fluorescent lights flickering just enough to look like blinking eyes, she rolled the VCR cart into a conference room and shut the door. She told herself she was previewing the tape so she could write an accurate synopsis for the catalog. She told herself she was saving time, saving money, saving the department another headache. She set the tape in the machine, sat on a folding chair with the back pressed to the wall, and let the screen fill a square of the dark with a light that never felt warm. This time, the picture began in the hallway of a house, the camera aimed at a narrow staircase. The steps were steep, the banister worn smooth at the places where hands had polished it through habit. The carpet runner had a faded floral pattern. Lena recognized a pattern like that from her grandmother's place, the kind of rug older relatives never threw away, no matter how frayed it became at the edges. The audio was clearer now. You could hear a radio murmuring something distant, not words, but the rise and fall of a human voice. Then the footsteps started again, that soft, measured thump. They were not coming down the stairs. They were ascending, slow, patient, pausing on every third step like whoever was climbing had to listen before they took the next one. Lena felt it then. The slightest tremor against the soles of her shoes, as if the building itself were acknowledging the sound. She paused the tape, pushed the chair back, and stood up too quickly. The room swam. When she hit play again, the camera angle had shifted. It now looked into a small bedroom at the top of the stairs. A bedspread with a quilted ring pattern covered the mattress. A glass of water sat on a nightstand beside a neatly stacked paperback and a cloth-bound journal with an elastic band. She saw a hand near the glass, not reaching for it, but resting beside it. For a terrible second, she thought the hand was severed, alone on the table. Then she recognized the slow flex of fingers at rest. Someone sat on the edge of the bed, just out of frame. The voice of the older person returned. That brittle whisper. "Don't face it," they said. "You feed it every time you do." The child said, "What if it says my name?" The older voice waited a heartbeat, then said, "It will. It always does. You say this instead," and the sentence that followed was swallowed by a burst of static that sounded like a storm sucked through a straw. Lena's phone buzzed on the table, a small mechanical rattle that felt obscene in that room of slow dread. She let it go to voicemail, not because she wanted to keep watching, but because she felt if she cut the thread the tape had thrown into the room, something else would tug the loose end through. The camera did not move, yet the focus looked past the bedroom door into the hallway, as if the lens had decided the important thing was not the bed or the hand, but the dark mouth of the stairwell where the air looked thicker than air should. The screen cut out. The time counter on the VCR rolled forward soundlessly for several more seconds. Then an entirely new scene appeared, one that made Lena make a noise she had not made since she was a child alone in the upstairs bathroom at night. The new frame showed a different living room, one with drop ceiling tiles and a cheap shelf of binders and a corkboard with pinned memos. It took her a heartbeat to recognize that it was the very conference room she was sitting in, the camera positioned exactly where the television was now. The angle caught the folding chairs, the coffee stain near the wall, and the metal door with the scratch across it shaped like a crooked smile. The television in the frame was dark, but its screen held a smear of light in which a person could be seen faintly, as if reflected in a rain-blurred window. Lena did not want to lean closer, but she did. The person in the reflection was seated at a table. Their posture was unmistakably her own. A hand came up in the reflection and touched the side of the face. Her fingertips on her own cheek felt cool. Then the door in the granular image opened a fraction, and a shadow crossed the threshold in a way that made her stomach drop because it did not move like a person. It moved like a tilt in the frame, as if the picture had been lifted and whatever was outside had slid toward the low edge. The screen went black, the VCR clicked, and the tape stopped. Lena found that her throat hurt. She realized she had been holding her breath long enough to make her lungs ache. She waited for the childish instinct to pass, the one that told her to lift her feet onto the chair like something might be patient and low to the ground. Instead, she stood up, pulled the tape free, sealed it, labeled it again for good measure, and carried it to the furthest edge of the evidence room where she placed it, without ceremony, behind a ledger of vehicle thefts no one consulted anymore. On the outside of the cassette box, she added one more line beneath "Do Not Watch." She wrote, "Return to Hanley Box." The next small thing that shouldn't have mattered but did was a maintenance call from the property owner who'd purchased the Hanley land when the farmhouse was finally condemned and knocked down. He wanted to build a storage garage and complained the foundation behaved like a sponge. Workers poured gravel and watched it settle overnight, as if the ground had exhaled. On the second morning, one of the crew placed his thermos on a stack of lumber, stepped away, and when he returned, the thermos lay on its side with a neat wet circle beneath it, water inching toward the old footprint of the staircase. He swore he heard a radio far away, a voice he couldn't make out, speaking steadily like someone reading a forecast to a room that had no window. Word spread the way it does in small places where everybody knows everybody, not through official channels, but through murmured confessions at the end of shifts. A dispatcher named Brooks admitted he heard his own name whispered from the archives cage when he passed it on a night he knew no one was inside. A EMT said the television in the break room flickered to a local news channel that hadn't existed in years and ran a crawl with his street spelled wrong. A substitute teacher told a friend she saw a shape in the reflection of the gym office door during a lockdown drill. Not a person exactly, but a bend in the light that felt like looking down old stairs. A journalist living 2 towns over, Mallory Keene, heard the rumors when she stopped for coffee, and a man in a dusty jacket told her, with a seriousness that made her set down her cup, that there was a tape at the sheriff's office that kept finding new rooms to show. She did not laugh. She was the sort who never laughed when someone told a story that made them scared. She filed a records request for anything relating to the Hanley property, to Buckhorn Road, to a VHS cassette turned in by a resident whose name she'd been given on a napkin stained with cream. The department responded with a polite denial that said no such item could be located. She filed again, narrower, and received a similar answer that used slightly different phrasing, as if an actual person had decided to make the refusal sound less like a form. Mallory did not give up. She visited the Hanley lot on a cloudy afternoon when the air smelled like rain and distant train brakes. The pad of the old foundation lay like a dull gray tooth against the weeds. A few stacked pallets leaned against a roll-up door on a new storage unit the owner was adding. She walked the perimeter slowly, counting her steps, listening. When she reached the place where a broken corner of concrete dipped into loam, her phone vibrated with a call from a number she didn't know. She answered without speaking first. A woman's voice said hello in that breathless, considerate tone people use when they are in a library or a church. Then the voice said, "Don't face it," and the connection filled with a rushing that did not sound like interference so much as wind in a narrow stairwell. Mallory said, "Who is this?" And the line went dead. Her call log recorded the number, but when she dialed it back, 3 hollow beeps told her it did not exist. She wrote the story anyway. She wrote it as a feature about the persistence of place, about the way a town layers its fears like paint over old wallpaper. She did not name the tape because she could not prove it. She did not accuse the department because she had no interest in being uninvited to the meetings where people say the things that matter when the recorder is off. She printed it in the Sunday edition with a photograph of her own hand closing around a fragment of blue and white ceramic she found near a place the old kitchen would have been, a piece of a plate, a vague pattern of flowers that had outlived the table where someone once set it down after drying the dish with a towel that smelled of sunshine. That would have been the end, a story people folded into their morning and forgot by lunch, if not for a thing that followed. 2 days after the story ran, a padded envelope arrived at the paper addressed to Mallory. Inside was a tape, no label, no return address, only a note on notebook paper torn from the center of a spiral. It read, "Not the same one, but you'll see." Her stomach let go a little. She set the tape on her desk, watched the sun strike its plastic edge, and told herself it was a prank as her skin tried to make her stand up and leave the building without her bag. She borrowed a VCR from the library, set it up in the paper's small conference room, and pressed play. The screen opened on a frame so ordinary that for half a minute her chest loosened with relief. It was a living room in a rental house, beige carpet, white walls, television against a wall, sofa with the kind of cushions that always look one day too old. Her reporter's brain started to inventory details she could track. A magnet from a diner in Cleveland on the fridge in a doorless kitchen, a floppy-eared dog bed with no dog in it, a blue rain jacket slung over a chair. Then she stopped taking notes because the camera angle was wrong in a way that made her palms sweat. The view came from a place slightly above the television, but too close to be an obvious shelf. It had that same chest-height perspective as the other tape, and there was no warble in the image a handheld camera would produce. The audio at first was nothing, and then faint, as if sound were arriving down a long hallway. A clock ticked. A floorboard gave a single, complaining groan as wood settled. Then, very softly, someone in another room said hello with that same considerate hush she had heard on the phone at the Hanley lot. The voice belonged to no one she knew. The word landed not as greeting, but as recognition, like when you answer your name in a roll call. Mallory waited for a person to enter the frame and explain the illusions we give ourselves when we watch an empty room long enough. No one did. Instead, the camera's focus shifted toward the black glass of the turned-off television, where something like a reflection began to show. It was not herself. It was the suggestion of a staircase behind her, wood darker than the floors in this room, rails braided with lamp shadow. The angle was wrong, impossible. It was as if the television were a window into a different place that did not care about the geometry of this address. A whisper came, clearer now. It said her last name, not entirely right, as if it struggled with the consonants. Then it said, "Don't face it." She did not touch the remote. She did not breathe for 2 beats. She did the thing the voice told her not to do. She stood up and stepped closer to the television until her own outline hovered on the glass. Her outline did not match the one in the tape. In the tape, the outline leaned toward the screen from an angle she could not occupy in this room. Her throat closed. She lunged for the stop button and punched it, then yanked the tape out like it might bite. Her fingers shook. She slid the cassette back into the padded envelope with the note and sealed it with a strip of tape like a bandage. She took the envelope to the sheriff's office with a tired half smile and a comment about pranks that get too personal. She did not want to keep that object in her building. Chief Whitaker, a man with kinder eyes than his jawline suggested, opened the envelope, looked at the tape, and said, in a voice that told her he had been waiting longer than she knew, "You should have brought this yesterday." He didn't mean to scold. He meant, this thing finds its way. He meant, we don't like bringing new names into its mouth. In a small room with a clock that ticked louder than a clock should, Whitaker, Doyle, Lena, and Mallory watched the tape together for precisely 1 minute and 8 seconds. The chief insisted on a timer. At 68 seconds, no matter what, he would stop it. He would unplug it from the wall if he had to. He said it like someone repeating a rule that is not written down but is followed because people who broke it could not bear to be the example. He pressed play. The room on the screen was the conference room they were sitting in, as if the tape had been made in the past hour. The chair where Mallory sat was empty in the image, as if in that version she had stepped away. The audio carried a sound none of them could mistake for anything else. The shuffle of someone climbing a narrow flight of stairs, the pause every 3 steps, the listening. Doyle put his knuckles on the table and did not move. Lena's lips parted, eyes fixed not on the screen, but on the window glass of the door to the hall, as if she expected to see a shadow pass by the small wired pane at any second. Whitaker's thumb hovered over the stop button from the first second. At 43 seconds, a whisper came. It said Mark, then Lena, then Mallory, then Chief, in a tone that somehow sounded courteous and delighted at once, as if the act of saying their names were a game. They all felt the floor vibrate. Doyle closed his eyes like a person bracing for a familiar pain. At 68 seconds, the chief pressed stop with a flat palm that made the plastic button thwack. The tape rolled a fraction too long. The image shifted in that fraction, and they all saw, for less than a breath, the top landing of stairs none of them recognized, and the corner where a small hand lay on a nightstand, fingers flexing once. Whitaker unplugged the TV and the VCR from the wall and coiled the cords with a concentration that looked like prayer disguised as habit. He put the tape in a plastic case, like a lunch container, and lowered it into a locked drawer that did not look like it had ever held anything as ordinary as office supplies. He told them they would sign a piece of paper that said the envelope had arrived, that they had noted the contents, that the contents were not described beyond cassette. He did not say why the description was vague. He did not have to. Lena understood that to name a thing too precisely felt like an invitation. That night, Mallory sat up in bed at 2:17 a.m., alarm cold in her chest, because she had felt a shift on the mattress at her knees like a cat jumping up. She did not own a cat. She heard the soft, polite hello from the space near her closet, said in a tone that sounded less like a greeting and more like someone pronouncing a word out loud to learn what it felt like in their mouth. She did not turn her head. She moved her fingers very slowly to the lamp switch and turned on the light. The room looked exactly as she left it. The air, however, had that thickness of a stairwell where many feet have passed. She whispered into the lit room, "You can't make it let go," and surprised herself by crying without a noise. Days passed. The county moved on with the practiced amnesia of places that refused to let their worst things define them. A football game, a church bake sale, a rumor that the storage unit company had gone out of business because no one wanted to rent space on land where the ground remembered a table and a radio and a bed that faced a door at the wrong angle. Mallory wrote about other things, budgets and road repairs and a good kid who taught himself to tune pianos. She also visited a professor of media studies at the university one county over, a man who looked like a nice uncle and kept an oscilloscope on his desk for no reason he could explain that didn't sound like a hobby. His name was Leland Morrow. He listened to her carefully, hands steepled like someone pretending to pray, and then realizing they had continued to hold the pose because it helped them think. Morrow agreed to examine the audio from the tape without watching the video. He said the old VCR had an audio out he could patch into his own equipment. He said it would preserve his objectivity, then laughed because objectivity was a word academics use when they mean, I need a ritual that makes me brave. They borrowed the department's machine and set it up in a lab that smelled like dust and old coffee. The waveform rose on his monitor like a soft mountain range. He found signal where there should have been nothing and silence where signal should live. He found a narrowband tone riding the entire recording, sometimes drifting just above human hearing. He said, tearing his eyes from the screen with evident effort, "This feels like something learning to hum along." He asked if he could see 68 seconds of the footage with the sound muted. Mallory said no and felt something like relief flash through the room, as if the walls themselves waited for that answer. Morrow respected the refusal and wrote his notes with ink that seemed to dry too slowly, letters smearing at the edges like they wanted to move. He emailed her later that night with a simple message that consisted of 2 lines. The first line said, "You don't want to be right about this." The second line said, "But I don't think you're wrong." As with all things people don't entirely understand, a second tape eventually appeared, not because anyone sought it, but because this is how such stories sustain their own breath. It arrived not in the mail, but on a shelf in the back of the archive's cage, placed perfectly square on top of a ledger from a year when Lena had not yet been born. She only saw it because she felt a draft move along her ankles, as if someone who had just passed by had brushed the air. She stood absolutely still, afraid that if she moved too quickly, she would step into the place where the draft had been and discover that the absence had more shape than the presence. The second tape looked like the first, unmarked, no label at all. She used a marker to write no on both edges, then put it in a separate case and took it to Whitaker with a composure she did not feel. He did not want to watch it. He also could not imagine not watching it. He chose 68 seconds again. This time, before he pressed play, he said a thing he had never said out loud at work. He said, "If it says your name, you don't say mine in return." He didn't know why that felt like the rule, it just did. The second tape showed the Hanley house as it had been in those earlier sequences, but from a different angle. The camera sat on the landing upstairs, aimed at a door left slightly ajar. The hand on the nightstand returned, fingers flexing once, slow. The tone Morrow had described became a feeling along the gum line in the watchers' mouths, a faint ache like the anticipation of a storm. 30 seconds in, the audio, though muted, seemed to push at the edges of the room like pressure. 40 seconds. 50. Doyle counted in his head and found his counting didn't align with the seconds, as if the tape had its own minute hand. At 62 seconds, the door in the picture swung wider without a hand on the knob. The bed sat empty. The water glass was half full. The journal had shifted a fraction, the elastic band now slanting. A voice that none of them could hear because the sound was muted, nevertheless placed itself in the geometry of the room like a new piece of furniture, and Mallory squeezed her eyes shut because she felt her own name forming behind her teeth unbidden. At 68 seconds, the chief pressed stop with a controlled, almost sorrowing finality. The screen went blue, the VCR whirred, the sound horribly domestic. They decided then, not with a ceremony, but with the muscle memory of people who have survived storms, that the tapes would be locked in a metal cabinet against the far wall, and that an inventory would list them only as 2 cassettes associated with a closed property matter. No one spoke of destroying them, no one raised fire or hammers. There was a sense that smashing the plastic would be like breaking the surface of a pond with your hand and discovering that what lies beneath does not like its mirror breached. Life layered itself back on top of the fear. Halloween came and went. The first hard frost silvered the grass behind the courthouse. The storage unit company finally rented 3 units to a contractor who didn't live in the county and didn't know to ask questions he wouldn't like the answers to. People hugged each other in supermarkets. They argued at the gas station about a new traffic pattern by the high school. The world did what it does, pretending the strange thing is contained when it has only been put in a place where the lights are rarely on. Mallory kept a single page from Morrow's notebook on her refrigerator with a magnet from a diner not in Cleveland, but in Altoona, a magnet shaped like a piece of pie. On that page, Morrow had drawn a staircase with 6 steps and written pauses here, 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 as if the pattern meant something. She found it soothing in a way. She found it good to remind herself that people can name beats even if they cannot stop the measure from playing. When the phone rang once at night and stopped, and her caller ID showed her own number, she breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth and said to the empty kitchen, "I won't face you." The clock on the microwave ticked 1 minute forward, and nothing else moved. You can hear the story and tell yourself the tape is the villain. You can tell yourself the people who watched it were reckless, arrogant, naive. You can tell yourself you would have locked it away at once and never let it near an outlet again. Maybe you would have. Maybe you wouldn't have. The truth that settled over Mill County like a thin frost was simpler and worse. The tape was not just a thing that captured images and sound. It was a room that learned rooms. It was a staircase that practiced the weight of new feet. It did not swallow people whole. It waited until they answered when it spoke softly from the dark. It took names, the way ivy takes brick, slowly, patiently, without intending harm, the way a plant does not intend, but nevertheless cracking the mortar. There are still drawers at the sheriff's office labeled with neat, patient handwriting. There are still shelves where the lights go on and off on timers. There is still a metal cabinet against the far wall with a log clipped to its front. The cabinet is locked. The key is signed out rarely, always with another person present, always with the accompanying decision to stop at 68 seconds. In the deadest part of night, when the streetlights wash the sidewalk in the color of dishwater and the vending machines click as their compressors switch on, a draft moves along the floor by the evidence cage, and a dispatcher at a desk far down the hall hears a soft, embarrassed tapping on the archives door. If you ever find a cassette at the bottom of a box from a place where the ground remembers footsteps, if you ever read the words "do not watch" written by a hand that pressed too hard with the marker, if you ever feel a stair tread flex under your foot in a house with no stairs, keep your eyes on your own hands. Keep your mouth closed around your own name. Keep the television dark. The tape was locked away for decades, not because the images were obscene, not because the sounds were inadmissible, but because what it learns, it does not forget, and what it says back to you will sound so much like care that you might mistake it for kindness. Don't. When you hear the soft hello in a room that should be empty, answer with silence and walk away while your legs still know your weight. A normal drive home became a real-life nightmare. Just after 9 on a cool autumn night, the parking lot behind the hardware store in Maple Bridge lay quiet and silver under the streetlights. The town was a small place in Rook County, tucked between cornfields and dark woods, the kind of place where people waved from porches and the corner diner knew how you took your coffee. The late shift had run long. The last customer wanted a new lock and a long conversation, and by the time the receipt printed, the clerk felt the weight of the hour resting on his shoulders. His name was Miles. He was in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered from hauling lumber and salt bags, calm and steady in a way that made people ask him for directions and jumper cables. He locked the back door, breathed in the clean bite of cold air, and told himself the drive home would be a straight line through the quiet. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? He slid into his sedan, a dark blue car with a worn seat and a little squeak in the steering, and checked the time on the dash, 9:12. He sent a quick text to Nora, who ran the morning shift at the bookstore near the river, then tucked the phone into the cup holder. He liked the same route every night. Cross the bridge, take County Road 17 past the water tower, follow the long curve through Pine Hollow, and then a straight shot along Old Quarry Road to his neighborhood. 2 lanes, no traffic lights, a few mailboxes so faded you could not read the numbers even in daylight. A simple drive. The radio came on with a low murmur. He set it to a soft station, something with warm voices and a piano that sounded like it was recorded in a church basement. The car hummed. The river glinted through the trees like a ribbon of graphite. A thin mist hovered just above the asphalt. Every few hundred yards, a farmhouse light glowed in the distance and then slid away behind him. Peace laid over the road like a blanket. At the start of Pine Hollow, the trees crowded in, tall and dense, their black shapes knitting together overhead. The white lines flashed beneath the hood. Miles knew each curve here by muscle memory. He knew where the pavement buckled, where the shoulder dipped, where deer liked to step out of the corn and test their luck. He drove a respectful speed. He had changed a tire at 2 in the morning once and would prefer to never repeat that event. He did not notice the dark car until the last second. It sat on the right shoulder with its hazard lights blinking, hood up, driver door open just a crack. The red flash of the hazards pulsed across the lane and painted the white guardrail a sickly shade. A purse lay on the passenger seat, scattered open like it had been turned over, lipstick rolling into a cup holder, a wallet half out, a key ring dangling. A phone was on the ground near the hinge of the open door. The interior light burned steady, a lonely little sun in an empty cabin. He lifted his foot, not quite braking, just thinking. He had stopped for people before, and he would stop again. But something about the scene pressed a thumb into his ribs. Why the phone on the ground? Why the door ajar? Why no one waving a flashlight or standing in the beams? The car itself looked wrong in a way that was hard to name. Windows dark, like there were blankets taped inside. Hood up, but no steam, no smell of oil, no scratch of tools. He coasted by and told himself he would call it in at the next rise where the cell bars were better. His chest felt tight. He passed and kept passing. The hazards pulsed behind him and then shrank and fell back into the tunnel of the trees. The mirror caught a flicker of movement. He glanced up and felt his throat seize. In the wash of his taillights, a shape unfolded from the abandoned car, too tall to be comfortable inside. It had been crouched behind the steering wheel, folded small, and now it stood in the open door and tilted as if measuring distance. Pale skin or maybe a white mask flashed once and vanished as the hazards blinked. The shape slid back down. The door closed. The hazards stopped. Miles gripped the wheel. He felt the old instinct to turn around and make it right, the same instinct that made him stop for a wandering dog or carry groceries for a stranger. The instinct wrestled with a colder voice that was saying, keep moving, call for help soon. Do not be the person who pulls over for a stage scene. The colder voice won. He pressed the accelerator. The low hills of the hollow rose and fell like a wave train. The radio turned into background static. He checked his phone. No signal. The little triangle sat empty. He lifted the device toward the windshield as if altitude might help. Nothing. He set it down and tried to breathe evenly. A white sign flashed by that warned of sharp turns. The trees pressed close again and the road narrowed. The night felt alive now, the kind of alive that made hairs stand up even under a hat. A pair of headlights appeared in the mirror, far back then closer. He told himself it was a traveler who had come up fast on the straight stretch. He told himself that people tailgate at night because they want your lights to pull them through curves. He told himself to ignore it. The headlights grew larger, bright enough to paint the outline of his back seat. The following car drifted left, then right, then dropped back like a swimmer testing a current. No passing now, not here. Miles kept his speed steady. He did not tap his brakes. He knew that tap could look like a challenge. The following car closed the distance in a quick surge. Its beam climbed the rear glass and stung his eyes. He could see the shape of a tall hood, a long windshield. He could see a dent on the front bumper on the right side. He could see a strip of black tape where a turn signal should have been. The same car. He knew it, bone deep, the way you know the shape of your own hands. His mouth went dry. The road ahead ran straight for a quarter mile before the next bend. At the end of that straight, he could see the faint comfort of a reflective mile marker and the ghostly outline of the old quarry fence. His car could handle 70 for a little while, but anything higher made the engine whine and the steering go light. He pressed the pedal and felt the floor. The following car matched him without effort. It drifted, right until its right front tire kissed the gravel on the shoulder, then snapped left again, a silent show of control that read like a threat. It fell back, then surged forward and bumped his bumper once, a shallow metal kiss that shoved his sedan forward with a hard jolt. The seatbelt cut across his chest. His teeth clicked. He corrected the wheel, breathed out through his nose, kept the lane. Another bump. Harder. A brief grind of metal. He felt a sting along his ribs as the belt bit. The road curved left here. On the right, a black drop into scrub and stone. He had helped tow someone from that ditch at noon in high summer. He had seen the gouge in the dirt that could swallow a wheel. He held the center while his heart pounded like a mallet. Up ahead, a green sign glowed, small, nothing fancy. Tucker Fuel, 3 miles, open all night. He pictured the little island of light by the highway, the gumball machine inside, the ringing bell over the door, the sign that always hung crooked over the coffee pot. He aimed himself at it like a ship aiming for a lighthouse. He kept his speed high enough to keep the space between, low enough that he could control the next curve. The pursuing car hung on his bumper, its brights flared. Miles felt the headache that comes from light burning hot inside the skull. The road leveled. The gas station sign rose up like a promise. A lone pump, a long shadow of a pickup near the side wall, a storefront with cheap blinds and shelves of antifreeze. He took the turn into the lot at a clean angle and stopped close to the door, so close that if anyone wanted his driver door, they would have to squeeze against the building. The other car slid past on the highway, slowed for 3 counts, and then poured on speed and disappeared. No plates were visible. The rear glass looked painted from the inside. The door to Tucker Fuel opened with a bell that sounded eager. The air smelled like coffee and grape soda. A woman behind the counter looked up, shock widening her eyes. Her name tag said, Marla. She wore a faded sweatshirt with a wolf on the front. Miles tried to keep his voice low, but everything came out in short reports. He told her there was a car. He told her the bumps. He told her he needed to call the sheriff. He felt like his words bounced around and did not land, like a dozen beads spinning in a cup. Marla rounded the counter without asking and walked the glass with him. She clicked the deadbolt and pulled the thin chain across the door. She pointed to the phone. He dialed. A calm voice answered at the county dispatch center and asked for location, nature of emergency, description. He gave the mile markers. He gave what he had seen. He tried to be slow and careful, but his breath kept catching. The dispatcher told him to stay inside and to keep the car where it was, nose toward the door. The dispatcher told him a deputy was already on the way from the river bridge and would arrive soon. The dispatcher told him he had done the right thing. Marla poured him coffee without asking. He wrapped his cold hands around the paper cup and stood where he could watch the road. She said he could stand in the office if he wanted. He said here was fine. A minute stretched long. The clock over the chips ticked. A truck rolled past on the highway and kept going, no trouble, just a ghost on a line. Then the red and blue lights bloomed against the glass like a sunrise. Deputy Ana Ruiz stepped out with her hat tilted low against the chill. She moved with the quick stillness of someone trained to be calm when other people are not. She examined the bumper first. The rear right corner had a scar of bare metal where paint was scraped clean, dust of blue curled like dry skin. She crouched and studied the gouge and then took pictures, each one marked by the white flash of her small camera. She asked Miles to repeat his story. He said it again, this time in a voice that sounded like the one he used at the store when he needed to explain a return policy. He heard his own words line up and tried not to think about the way his pulse was still climbing. Another unit arrived. Deputy Reed, a broad man with a radio voice that sounded like gravel. They took statements from Marla, too. She had not seen the other car, but she put her hand on the counter to show how Miles had put his hand on the counter and how cold his skin had been. Ruiz said she would sweep the highway up to the hollow. Reed would go back toward the bridge. If the car was out there, they would find it. They did not find it. Not the abandoned car, not the pursuit car, nothing. There were faint tire marks in the gravel at the place where the hazards had flashed, but the marks were confused by dozens of older tracks and the soft brush of wind. The phone that had been on the ground was gone. If it had ever been there at all, the road had swallowed it. Reed called in from the bridge with the same report. Nothing. The night had closed behind the event like a curtain. Ruiz returned to Tucker Fuel and told Miles she would follow him home. She asked if he had someone waiting. He said yes, Nora, at the house near the ball field. He said he would call on the way as the bars returned. She told him to take it slow. She would stay right behind with her lights off until they reached the neighborhood. He thanked her. His gratitude came out rough and quiet. They drove, Ruiz a patient shadow in the mirror. The night felt thinner now, stretched but alive. Miles thought about the figure unfolding from the car. He thought about the way the hazards had clicked off before the pursuit began. He thought about timing and planning and how easy it would be on an empty road to play at hunting. He checked the ditches for any flicker of movement and saw only rows of cornstalks rattling like bones. At home, Nora stood on the porch in a wool jacket, hair tied up in a knot that meant she was tired and annoyed and worried at the same time. A porch light made her face look pale and strong. She took one look at the bumper and swore under her breath. Ruiz spoke to them both. The deputy was careful not to tell them stories. She said there had been reports in neighboring counties of staged breakdowns, cars waiting for good Samaritans, people who had been forced to the shoulder by nudges and then robbed, sometimes just robberies, sometimes worse. She told them to keep the car in the garage if they could, to call if any unfamiliar vehicle idled at the corner for more than a minute, to save the shirt Miles had worn in case residue could be lifted from the fiber. Ruiz did not raise her voice. She spent 20 minutes making sure they had the number to the direct line. Then she left, slowed down the block, pausing once to look back, as if to let the neighborhood know someone was watching. In the morning, Miles noticed a tiny black scuff under the trunk lip. It looked like gum, but felt like hard plastic. He pried it with a flathead screwdriver, and a small rectangular magnet came loose, stuck to a plastic shell no bigger than a matchbox. The device clattered onto the driveway. Inside was a battery and a little printed board with a chipped corner. He had seen trackers online at the store when he stocked the shelves. Not the same brand, but the same shape and use. He took a photo and texted it to Deputy Ruiz with a single sentence that read, "Found this under the trunk." He waited in the kitchen with his second cup of coffee and the quiet thump of the refrigerator. The deputy called back fast. She asked him to seal the device in a sandwich bag and leave it on the porch. She told him she would swing by on her lunch hour to pick it up. She told him he had done the right thing again. He did not feel right. He felt like someone had been inside his life without permission. Work felt like play acting that day. The aisles were the same. The bell over the door made its friendly sound. He cut key blanks and hauled birdseed bags to the tailgate of a pickup. He showed a retired teacher how the garden hoses were organized by length and price. He smiled. The smile drifted. In his mind, he kept seeing the shape unfold from the car and the way the hazards went dark. He kept seeing the long windshield of the chase car and the flat blank of its rear glass. He stepped outside at lunch and stood in the sun to warm up. He listened for tires. He heard only a train on a far line. That evening, he changed his route. He told himself this was not fear. It was caution. He took River Road to the highway and looped past the outlet mall with the bright new stores and the mulch smell from the landscape beds. He made his way to the Maple Lantern Diner and sat at the counter for a bowl of chili with chopped onions and a square of cornbread. The place was cheerful and chrome bright. A man 2 stools down noticed the fresh scrape on the bumper and asked the casual question people ask when they want to hear a good story. Miles gave a simple version and watched the man's face flatten. The man was a long-haul driver who knew every turn on County Road 17. He said he had seen a car with a taped turn signal parked at the pull-off near Black Creek Bridge 2 nights before. He had seen another driver slow and then dart away. He said he had reported it to the highway patrol. He said he had not stopped. He said, "Good on you for not stopping." The weekend came, the town breathed. High school football under the lights filled Friday night with the sound of brass bands and the soft thud of running feet. Saturday morning smelled like cinnamon rolls. Miles and Nora walked the farmer market and pretended the world was as simple as the bushel baskets in front of them. He scraped the garage floor clean and made a neat line of tools and sworn off words. He thought the week had been a lesson and it was over. Sunday night proved him wrong. At 9:24, he turned from the highway onto his street. A dark sedan idled at the corner by the ball field. Its lights were off. There was no driver visible. The windows were too dark. He slowed and looked without turning his head. The car did not move. He passed, parked, and sat with the engine idle, counting to 30. The sedan rolled away as soft as a thought. No plates again, no visible stickers or dents, just the shape of a car built to vanish in plain sight. He did not sleep well. He dreamed of long lanes of white lines that ran out into corn, of doors that closed on their own, of hands under the trunk lip. He woke at 1 to the thrum of a distant engine and lay still listening. It faded. He woke again at 2 to the scrape of tires on gravel. By morning, he felt thinner at the edges, as if his skin had been sanded. On Monday, Ruiz called with an update. The tracker had no stored data that the lab could pull. The chip was cheap and anonymous. It might only have broadcast a low signal to a nearby phone. The deputy said a similar device had turned up in another case near a rest area off the highway. Nothing concrete tied the events together. She told him again to be careful and to call if anything felt wrong. He listened hard to the calm in her tone. He borrowed some of that calm and held it like a tool. The week slid by in a way that felt off balance. Twice, he noticed a dark sedan in the distance on his way home. Once at the water tower, once idling near the feed store. He kept his speed controlled and stayed under bright signs in view of cameras and curious staff. He began to think about how many cameras watched the road that saved him, and he felt grateful for their dumb glass eyes and silent patience. He stopped at Tucker Fuel every night, bought a pack of gum he did not need, and stood for a minute making conversation with Marla, who had switched from wolf sweatshirt to a shirt with a faded mountain and a hawk. Routine grew like a shield. On Thursday, a curious piece of news swept through town. The sheriff's office released a short note that asked drivers to avoid stopping for stranded vehicles on unlit 2-lane roads. The note advised pulling into the nearest lit area and calling the situation in from a safe spot. It did not mention arrests. It did not mention a car with a taped light. People read it and nodded. People told other people that you could not be too careful. On Friday, Miles found an old dash camera in a clearance bin at work. He had not wanted to become the sort of person who documented everything, but the old part of him that liked neat rows and hardware that matched said this was a small price for a quiet night. He wired it up before he clocked out and set the little lens to watch the road from the center of the windshield. The camera was not fancy, but the tiny screen showed the white lines bright and honest. Just after 9, he crossed the bridge. He stayed off County Road 17 and took the longer sweep past the mall. He slowed at a yellow light and felt his phone buzz. He did not check it. He rolled past the Maple Lantern and thought about coffee. He chose home. He turned on to Old Quarry Road and let the car settle into that friendly groan it made at 52. The world softened. He exhaled. In the mirror, a dark shape appeared. It hugged the lane divider, then moved to the right, then drifted left. It held back at a steady distance. The distance did not feel like coincidence. He could hear the hollow beat of his own pulse in his ears. He picked his landmark. 2 miles ahead, A warehouse with floodlights sat at the corner of Flint Street. There were always night staff, moving pallets. There were always cameras, bright ones that made even clean cars look guilty. He would not be chased into the woods again. He would pick a bright place and make the line of travel predictable. The dark shape moved closer. It drew up alongside for a breath, then tucked back as if performing a little test. He kept his hands at 10 and 2, felt like a student again, paid attention to his rear bumper and the space that wrapped around him like a bubble. The shape settled in behind. Its lights stayed low. It did not bump this time. It simply shadowed him in a way that said, patience. The word made the skin between his shoulders tighten. The floodlights at the warehouse bloomed white and strong. The lot lay open like a stage. A forklift crossed slow in the far lane. A worker in a neon vest stood smoking near a stack of pallets that seemed to go on forever. Miles eased into the turn lane and hit his signal. The shadow car slowed with him. He thought about pulling mid-lane and stopping hard, letting the pursuer choose. But even in imagination, the tactic felt like a risk that did not pay. He chose a simple entrance and swung into the lot. The dark sedan rolled past instead of turning. It coasted to the far side of the intersection and paused. From where Miles sat, he could see no driver, only a black interior with a hint of a pale shape. His heartbeat stopped trying to leap and settled into a heavy drum. He killed his engine and stepped out into the blast of warehouse light. The worker in the neon vest flicked his cigarette and waved. Miles waved back and felt irrational gratitude for a stranger chewing mint gum. He stood by his car for a full minute and watched the dark sedan. A long truck rolled through, diesel whispering like a river. The sedan moved again, a slow roll, then a rise of speed. It drifted away down Flint Street and dissolved into dark. Miles opened his phone and called Ruiz. She answered with a tired voice that still sounded like a shield. She told him a unit was nearby. She asked him to remain where he was. She asked if he was alone. He said he was, but the way he said it made it sound as if he was not. A patrol car eased into the lot under the glare. Ruiz stepped out. She had a look on her face that said she wished she could be two places at once. She stood next to him, and together they watched the road without speaking for a long stretch. She finally said they had found a vehicle 2 towns over earlier in the evening, plates that returned to a car reported wrecked in another state, interior stripped bare like a bone, windows painted on the inside, no fingerprints worth lifting. She said a neighbor in a farm lane had reported a similar vehicle last week. She said they were not alone in this. The way she said it made it sound like both a comfort and a warning. 2 more weeks passed. The nights grew colder. Nora placed a small baseball bat by the door, even though she had always made fun of people who kept weapons by the door. Miles learned to notice the pattern of his own taillights reflected in the back of delivery vans. He learned the angle that made a plate readable on a dash camera. He learned to repeat details the way dispatch wanted them. His brain felt like a filing cabinet that had been put in order by someone neat and stern. One night, near the end of that second week, the story gathered its last sharp edge. Miles had stayed late to help at the store with the first rush of holiday boxes. He left at 9:40. The town had already put up the lights that make the river look like a line drawn in sugar. He ran the long route past the mall and then cut toward the quarry because the lines there comforted him. The road was empty. At the rise near the water tower, his headlights licked over a parked car near a pull-off. The hood was up, the hazard lights flashed, the driver door sat open a little, a bag lay on the passenger seat, a phone lay on the blacktop inches from the door. Every detail was the same. Every detail was a script. His heart climbed up and tried to hide in his throat. But some other part of him, a part assembled from 13 sleepless nights and the way a tracker feels under your fingers, took control. He did not brake. He did not even slow. He drifted slightly toward the center line to give the scene a wide berth. He watched the door in the corner of his eye. A shape unfolded and stayed low. The hazards clicked off exactly as before. The dark car slipped from the pull-off and rolled out behind him like a toy pulled by a string. Miles did not run. He held 55 like a promise. He let the distance exist. He aimed for Tucker Fuel with a calm certainty that felt like a blade. He pulled into the lot and set his bumper to the glass with the exact same angle as before. Marla looked up with a face that was already moving. She reached for the phone without being asked. She kept her eyes on the road while the call went through. The dark sedan passed the station, slowed, paused, and flowed away. The bell over the door chimed like a heartbeat. Above the counter, an old black and white television crackled with a game he could not see, only the uniforms, white blur against green blur. This time, Ruiz did not go to the shoulder. She did not search the ditch. She had another unit waiting a mile down in the dark, turn that twisted before the bridge. They did not run lights. They sat quiet. When the dark sedan came around the curve, a spotlight hit it from the bank side with a clean square of hard white. The car hesitated. Reed pulled out and pinned the angle. The sedan tried to jump the shoulder. The shoulder dipped and grabbed the front tire. The car skidded and spun once and went nose first into a low ditch that stayed dry even after heavy rain. The engine screamed and then coughed. The driver door flew open and two figures ran into the scrub. They were fast. The deputies chased, but the night swallowed the shapes the way it always swallows what it wants. Back at the car, Ruiz found the windows painted inside with flat black. The interior was stripped, the rear seats were gone, there was no backplate. The front plate was the wrong number by 1 digit, a trick for any casual glance. In the trunk well, where a spare tire should sit, there was only a clean circle and a smell like rubber and glue. Nothing in the car tied to a name, nothing in the field led to a house. The tow truck took the sedan away under a tarp. Ruiz drove by the station at 2 in the morning and told Marla that the car would not be back. She told Miles that the world does not always give you a name you can hold, but sometimes it gives you the absence of a threat, and that is worth something too. She told him this would probably stop now. She told him to keep the camera running anyway. It did stop. Life retook its shape. Not quite the same, but strong. Miles went back to County Road 17 in daylight only. At night, he took the bright route and let the floodlights bless his hood. He kept a small kit in the trunk, water and flares and a blanket because planning soothed him. He talked to strangers a little less, but when he did talk, he looked them in the eye and listened until they were done. Nora teased him about his cautious roots, but her voice had that soft center that meant she approved. Sometimes he would stop by the warehouse on his way home and sit for 5 minutes watching pallets move and lights blink on and off like patient stars. Sometimes he would pull into Tucker Fuel for a coffee he did not need, and Marla would tell him about a stray cat that had adopted the dumpster, and they would stand there in the hum of the cooler and the sugar smell of donuts and admire the way a small animal can survive on a patch of asphalt if it chooses. Sometimes, on a windless night, he would drive the long curve and catch sight of the pull-off where the first scene had been arranged, and he would feel the strange mixture of gratitude and anger that lives in the chest of any person who has seen something near and ugly and survived it. In Rook County, people began to tell new stories at their kitchen tables. They told each other to drive to the light. They told each other to trust their gut. They told each other that help is real, but so are traps, and that both truths can live in the same night. They said the deputies had done good work. They said the night feels different now, but different can mean safer if you do not let fear steer the wheel. One evening in late fall, a thin rain fell, and the river ran high. Miles left the store at 9:40 again and took the bright route by habit. The dash camera winked its red light. He crossed the bridge and felt the tires roll easy on wet lines. At the warehouse corner, a long truck stood still with its hazard lights ticking. A young driver waved with both hands. Miles felt his chest tighten, then felt at ease. He pulled near, not too near, and stayed inside the car while he called the number from the sticker on the truck door. The dispatcher answered and sent a service unit. The driver put his hands up to say thank you and stayed by his cab. No one unfolded from the dark. No one bumped a bumper. A service truck arrived, and the night resumed its plain shape. Miles took a breath that went all the way down. He drove home and sat for a moment with the engine off in the driveway, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the soft, tired rain. Later that night, he stood by the kitchen sink and watched the street through the little diamond window. The porch light made a pale coin on the step. A neighbor walked a dog that wore a tiny raincoat. Somewhere down the block, a television laughed. He thought about how close a person can come to something mean without seeing its name. He thought about a simple rule that had saved him: drive to the light, and he felt a quiet swell of thanks for Marla and for Ruiz and for every forklift operator and truck driver who has ever made a parking lot bright for a stranger at the edge of panic. He turned off the light and went to bed. The house settled, the wind touched the eaves, he lay still, and he listened. The world was not safe, the world was not fair, but the world contained light, and he had seen the way it pushed back the dark when it mattered, and that memory sat in him like a small fire that would not go out. He dreamed of straight roads and morning fog that burned off quick. He dreamed of a sky the color of brushed steel. He woke just before dawn and felt steady. On the drive to work that morning, the river was a wide mirror. The sun climbed slow. The blue sedan held the lane like a faithful horse. He passed the spot near the water tower and did not look too long. He passed Tucker Fuel and waved to Marla, who had propped the door with a brick for the fresh air. He pulled into the lot behind the hardware store and sat for one last quiet moment before unlocking the back door. He looked in the mirror at his own face, older by a notch, sharper in the eyes, and he nodded once, as if to mark the change and accept it. A normal drive had become a real-life nightmare. It had also become a reminder, the kind that hurts and teaches in the same breath. He had listened to the voice that said, "Keep moving toward the light." He had learned the shape of danger on an American two-lane road. He had learned that help is often just a door and a bell and a person who looks up and cares enough to move. He had learned that some nights you choose the route with cameras and forklifts and floodlights, and that choice is not fear, that choice is wisdom. He took the keys from his pocket, felt the small weight, and went inside to start the day. A discovery so strange, even police refused to explain. By the time the Friday night lights flickered off at Millfield High, the air had already turned glassy and cold. You could see your breath drift and vanish over the parking lot, slow and ghost-like, as people shuffled toward their cars. It was late October, a little past 10:40 p.m., and somewhere beyond the last row of houses, the black line of the woods rose like a wall. Locals called that stretch Blackwood Pines. Most cut a wide circle around it after dark. A few swore they heard things moving in there when the wind died. Not animals, not people, just movement. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Two students made the mistake of taking the trail anyway. They had done it before. A shortcut from the field to the duplexes along Wilson Street. They were laughing at first, jackets zipped to their chins, footsteps crunching through frost and leaves. One kept glancing at his phone, the screen lighting his face. The other was listening for owls. He said the silence felt wrong. No crickets, no distant highway, just their breathing and the whisper of pine needles. They saw the light. At 10:52 p.m., according to the first frantic call to 911. It was not a flashlight, not a fire. The glow came from the ground itself, a low blue pulse that made the damp leaves look like glass. It flickered with a slow heartbeat, brightened, dimmed, and brightened again. They moved toward it because that is what people do when their minds are split between curiosity and fear. They step closer. They tell themselves one more step will explain everything. The clearing was not large, elliptical, almost a perfect oval, as if the trees had agreed to lean back. In the middle, the leaves were parted, and the dirt had a sickly sheen. Half buried in the soil sat a circle of metal 5 feet across. Smooth, pitted in places, wet even though the ground around it was dry. It was flush to the earth like a lid over something deeper. The blue glow leaked through hairline seams, as if the thing were breathing under the surface. When the taller student placed his hand a few inches above it, the back of his teeth hummed. They ran. They tripped. One of them dropped his phone and doubled back for it, fingers shaking so hard he kept missing the lock screen. When they finally cleared the tree line, they could see the stadium lights dying to black behind them and a few stragglers still in the lot. The call came in breathless and broken. The dispatcher on duty logged it at 10:58 p.m. and wrote the words possible downed equipment and unknown hazard. She sent a car anyway. Deputy Holden was first on scene at 11:14 p.m. His cruiser idled on the shoulder, hazard lights ticking, as he stepped into the timber with a mag light and an old habit of talking to himself when he felt a shiver he could not explain. He found the trail, he found the crushed leaves, he found the clearing and the metallic circle at its center. He crouched, he did not touch it. The beam of his mag light dimmed and ghosted out. So did his radio for a few seconds, an empty hiss like wind in a bottle. He clicked the mic anyway and said he needed backup, voice low and steady. He said there was some kind of device. He said the ground was vibrating. By 11:32 p.m., there were 3 patrol cars along Wilson Street and another a few hundred yards north where an old logging road cut into the trees. The officers moved slowly, shoulders tight, hands hovering near holsters because something about the air felt charged. They fanned out and circled the clearing. They each saw it. They saw the glow. They heard the hum under their boots, a note not quite sound, not quite pressure. One of them swore he could feel the hum in his throat. A sergeant named Avery decided they would do nothing until the state was notified. He did not want anyone touching the thing. He asked a younger officer to plant a traffic cone at the edge of the clearing, just to mark the entry point. The cone slid a few inches the second it touched the ground and settled crooked. That was when the sergeant said, very calmly, that everyone should step back. They did. At 12:10 a.m., the noise changed. The glow thinned to a paler shade, almost white, then flared. The trees around the oval bled shadows in every direction. Pine needles lifted and lowered as if stirred by wind, but there was no wind. Something in the dirt flexed. The men backed away again, boots cracking sticks, breath frosting in frantic bursts. A dozen birds erupted from the black trees and shot up, spiraling in confusion. Then everything went still. There were other calls that night. A woman in a house 2 blocks from the tree line complained that her ceiling fan began spinning backward at midnight opposite the switch. A man on Parkview Avenue said every photo on his living room wall was tilted in the same direction by morning, as if the house had been nudged. The 911 dispatcher added those to the log because she did not know what else to do. At 1:47 a.m., a convoy of black SUVs rolled into Millfield and slid onto Wilson Street, like they had practiced the turn. Their headlights were low, their plates were meaningless. The men who climbed out wore jackets without patches and carried cases they did not label. They walked into the timber without asking the officers anything beyond where. They set up tower lights. They dragged a blue tarp across the ground, then rolled it back like a tongue. They unloaded a portable generator that coughed, caught, and thumped. The sound masked the smaller hum beneath their boots, but it didn't erase it. People at the windows in the houses across the street watched in their kitchen dark and would later pretend they had fallen asleep. By sunrise, the clearing was a scar. The blue glow was gone. The metallic circle was gone. There was a pit 6 feet wide, 3 feet deep, and filled back up with a different color of soil, as if someone had brought in a fresher kind from a town away. The men with the cases walked out as the light came up and the SUV doors shut in a crisp rhythm like a marching band. The officers, pale and quiet, were told to finish the perimeter and take down the tape by noon. When a local reporter asked if there had been a gas leak or a sinkhole, the sergeant said the investigation was ongoing and the area was safe. He did not look at the reporter while he said it. What happened next is the part people argue about, because it is the part nobody can prove. In the week that followed, whenever the wind died, you could feel something in your chest if you stood at the edge of the clearing. Just a pulse. Not a noise, exactly. A pressure wave in the sternum. Some blamed power lines, others blamed factories 2 towns over. One man swore it vibrated his molars. A retired teacher brought a compass and watched the needle drag itself in a slow circle like it was drunk. A kid with a drone tried to fly straight over the trees, and the drone flipped, steadied, then drifted sideways, fighting something you could not see. The kid said, the camera feed developed a white halo at the exact moment it passed over the clearing. He deleted the clip a day later because the battery started swelling on his desk. A hiker vanished the following Thursday. He was a line cook at the diner on Old County Road, quiet, known for walking a lot after his shift to clear his head. His route took him along a dirt path that paralleled the tree line for a mile, then curved away. He never came home. The search started before sunrise. It ended after midnight. Dogs circled the oval of the clearing and whined. They pawed at the ground and would not cross onto the disturbed soil. The only thing the searchers found was the line cook's knit cap sitting upright on a low stump, as if someone had placed it there for him to come back and get. There were no prints that made sense. The sheriff stopped the search when the fog moved down from the ridge, and the beams of flashlights just made white walls. The next morning, a CCTV camera 2 blocks away showed something strange. At 3:12 a.m., every streetlight on Wilson Street flushed brighter for 1 second, then dropped to a dimmer glow. The tape showed that surge like a breath across the entire frame. That was when people stopped talking to officers at the coffee counter. They spoke to each other instead, over fences, across aisles at the hardware store, in the whispery dark of the church vestibule after evening service. They listed the oddities like tally marks, the fridge magnets that slid toward the left corner of the door, the auto shop's analog clock that ran slow, then fast, then slow, always around the same time of night, student tablets that charged on the bus, but immediately drained when brought to the corner of the field nearest the timber. A man who tried to mow his lawn near the trailhead said the mower's engine stuttered every time the blade pointed toward the pines. He turned in a slow circle and listened to the stutter keep time, click, 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 like a metronome. Nobody wanted to be the first to say it out loud, but they all said it quietly, sooner or later. Whatever the men in the SUVs took that night, they didn't take all of it. Something was still there, something under the ground. 2 weeks after the first incident, a local radio host invited callers to share their stories, and the phone board lit up. A nurse described a patient who came in with steady vitals, then the monitor leaped as if a hand had pushed on the chest pad. A teacher said her classroom projector flickered whenever she cued videos after lunch, but not during morning announcements. A mail carrier described standing, frozen, at the exact edge where the trail met the road, feeling like the woods were pressing against the front of his shirt. He put 1 foot forward, and the feeling grew. He put his foot back, and it eased. He did that 4 times, like he was stepping into cold water and back out, and then he turned around and delivered the rest of his route on the opposite side of the street. The police chief held a short press conference that Friday. At 4:00 p.m., 30 minutes before sundown, he read from a printed statement. He said state agencies had surveyed the area and found no environmental hazards. He said rumors were making people frightened, and frightened people misinterpret ordinary things. Someone asked whether there was any truth to the claim that the department had signed non-disclosure agreements. He folded the paper in half and said, "The town is safe." He said it twice. He did not take another question. On Sunday night, a group of neighbors decided to walk to the clearing as a kind of dare. There were 5 of them, all adults, all stone sober. They wore headlamps, thick jackets, and boots. They took a plastic bag in case they found any litter to prove their point when challenged online the next day. They reached the oval at 9:26 p.m. and switched their lamps to the lowest setting. The ground looked ordinary at first. Then their eyes adjusted. In the dirt were arcs, not drawn with a stick, but pressed by something heavy and curved. The arcs intersected and made almond shapes that overlapped like a chain of eyes. When one neighbor leaned to touch a shape, his headlamp fluttered and steadied. He said it felt like the dirt pulsed under his palm, a tiny upward push, then nothing. He swallowed hard and said he was done. They all were. At home that night, one of them found a thin layer of grit on the soles of his boots that glowed faintly when the bedroom was dark and the door was shut. Not bright, just enough to make him pull his foot back as if he had stepped on something, breathing. He scrubbed the boots with dish soap until his hands cramped. The calls to the department did not stop, but the responses changed. Officers said they were reassigned. Others said they were told to pass anything about Blackwood Pines to a different number. The 911 dispatcher who took the first student call transferred to a desk job 2 towns over. She told a cousin she did not like the way the phone sounded after midnight. She said there was a buzz you could hear if you pressed the receiver just right to your ear, as if a deep note lived inside the line and waited for you to listen. A winter storm hit, and the ground froze. For a while, the stories thinned. People said the snow sealed the place up. People said whatever had been under there was sleeping. But when the thaw came, so did the smell. Not rot, not gas. A faint, metallic scent like wet batteries mixed with pine and river rock. It made the skin at the back of the neck tighten. A trail runner gagged the first time he caught it and cut his loop short. A mother walking a stroller stopped, turned around, and went home by a longer route, heartbeat in her throat. One late evening, just before full dark, a state geologist parked along Wilson Street and walked in alone with a handheld meter and a notepad. She was not escorted, she was not announced. She paused at the edge of the oval, adjusted the meter, and stayed very still. A man smoking on his porch watched the pale rectangle of her notepad move as she wrote. When she came out, he asked how it looked. She met his eyes for a second and said the soil was non-compliant with expectation. Then she climbed into her car and drove away without her headlights for the first 30 feet. Months passed. People tried to make the whole thing into a story that could be told in a single sitting. They could not. It sprawled. It ducked when you reached for it. It tangled itself up in small evidence, 1,000 strange details that refused to turn into a single clean answer. A barista used a new grinder after the old one began arcing a flick of blue inside the housing. A school bus driver avoided a stop for a week because the children all got nosebleeds when the bus idled facing the timber. A runner mapped her jog and saw the GPS track deviate 3 feet to the left, then 3 feet to the right, then swing back, an invisible river pushing and pulling her as she kept her pace. She had not felt it. Or maybe she had and called it wind. The diner on Old County Road put out a tip jar with a hand-lettered sign that read for answers. It filled faster than the one for coffee. People laughed at that, then did not laugh. You could sit in the corner booth with the nicked Formica and hear someone at the counter tell the same story they swore they would never repeat. Their voice would drop, and you could see their hands flatten on the surface, palms down, as if they were steadying themselves against something that might tilt the room. When the anniversary rolled around, the town did not mark it. There were no posts from the department, no statements from the chief, no official anything. But the sky over Millfield was clear that night, and the moon sat low like a coin, and just after 11:00 p.m. 3 porch cameras along Wilson Street captured a thin sheet of fog sliding across the road from the woods to the houses without touching the ground. It flowed over the asphalt like oil. It climbed the curb without breaking. It reached the lawns and rolled back, retreating to the trees in one smooth motion. The cameras recorded that and then glitched for exactly 4 seconds each. In those 4 seconds, the timestamp stalled, then snapped ahead. People will tell you that what we found in those woods was a machine. Others will say it was a lid, and the real thing was beneath, and the men with the SUVs just took the lid. A few will tell you not to think of it as a thing at all. They will tell you to think of it as a place that does not belong where it is, a pocket of rules that don't match our rules, pressing up from underneath like a bubble caught under wallpaper. And if you stand in the right spot after midnight, they'll say you can feel the pattern it makes, the pulse that is not a sound, the pressure that is not a hand, the sense that something vast and patient has turned its attention toward you, not with eyes, but with the cold curiosity of a tide measuring a shoreline. Ask the police about it and watch what happens. Watch the way their faces go still, like a windless pond. Watch how their words slow down. They will say it was a utility issue. They will say the area is safe. They will say the rumors are making people nervous, and that nervous people see things. They will not describe the way the ground lifted under their boots that first night, a fraction of an inch, enough to make every muscle lock. They will not tell you how their radios went dead in their hands and how the silence in their ears was loud enough to make them flinch. They will not admit that for one long breath it felt as if the clearing was breathing back, and that something beneath the soil pressed up, testing the weight of the world, and then withdrew. They do not say that part. They look past you and talk about weather and new tires for the cruisers and the fundraiser for the canine unit. They change the subject. They ask how your family is. They call you by your first name and remind you to lock your car because there have been break-ins on the west side. But Millfield remembers, houses remember, the trees remember, the oval is still there, pale dirt in a shape the rain can't undo, and if you stand on Wilson Street on a still night and stare into the dark line where the pines begin, you will notice how your breath feels heavier when you exhale, like the air is listening to you. You will notice that your phone degrades to a single bar for no reason at all. You will notice that the hairs on your forearms lift, even under your jacket, even with your fists shoved deep into your pockets. And you will think about the boys who saw the light, the officer who knelt and felt the hum in his teeth, the men who came and took what they could and left what they could not carry. You will think about the cap on the stump and the boots that glowed faintly in a darkened room. You will think about fog that crawled like an animal and lights that surged like a heartbeat, and the small, private way a person's face changes when they admit, just to themselves, that they have met something that will never fit into words. A discovery so strange, even police refuse to explain it. And maybe that is the only honest thing anyone has said about Blackwood Pines. Not that it is dangerous, not that it is safe, only that it is there, under the dirt and the leaves and the thin shell of what we prefer to believe is solid ground. It is there, and it is patient, and it is listening. If you go, do not step into the oval. Do not talk loudly. Do not drop anything you are not willing to leave behind. Go home while the streetlights still feel like a promise, and shut your door and set your phone face down on the table if it starts to buzz. If the house hums back at you in a slow, steady rhythm, do not answer. Stand very still. Wait for it to pass. And when it does, when the air lightens and your breath comes easy again, tell yourself the same thing everyone here tells themselves in kitchens and living rooms and quiet cars at red lights. Tell yourself it is over. Tell yourself it will not come back. Tell yourself that whatever moved under that clearing went back to sleep. Then listen very carefully to the silence that follows. If you hear the smallest tremor under your feet, a whisper you feel more than hear, do not look toward the trees. Look at your hands. Watch how they shake. Count your fingers. Say your name out loud to keep the room steady. He should have never opened that door. It was late on a Friday night in a quiet town on the outskirts of Pennsylvania. The air felt heavy after a day of rain, and the road that curved past Ashwood Drive shone with a thin black gloss. Porch lights were dim, televisions glowed behind curtains, and a freight train in the distance called out with a low horn that rolled over the roofs like a warning. At the end of the street stood the old boarding house, a brick rectangle with a sagging porch and a doorbell that never worked. Inside that house, a man named Daniel tried to sleep, but sleep had been avoiding him for weeks, and the night had other plans. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Daniel rented a narrow room on the second floor, right above the front door. He worked at a warehouse near the river, sorting shipments that came in long after sunset. He was the quiet type, steady at a job that did not ask questions. He kept a small schedule on his wall, neat and orderly lines with times blocked out for work and meals and the odd call to his sister in Ohio. He did not drink, he did not go out, and he did not believe the stories the tenants traded in the stairwell. The ones about the basement, and the thing that moved in the old crawl space behind the laundry, and the door at the end of the second floor hall that never opened for anyone. At 11:43 p.m., while he was sorting a stack of bills under the glow of his small lamp, the radiator clicked and sighed, the rain ticked at the window, and from the hallway came 3 slow knocks. The sound was hollow and patient. It did not sound like someone calling on a neighbor. It sounded like a rhythm that had started long before he arrived and would continue long after he was gone. He waited. The knocks did not repeat, so he told himself it was the pipes, or the wood, or the wind that rattled the downspout. He stood anyway, as if a string had been tied around his ribs and tugged him toward the door. He opened his room and leaned into the hall. The overhead light's hum buzzed through a yellow haze. The carpet was thin and stained near the edges. At the far end, past the framed exit map and the dusty fire extinguisher, stood a door that matched none of the others. It was a touch taller, a touch narrower, as if it had been measured for another house and shoved into place here, a compromise in wood and paint. He knew the stories, that it was a storage closet, that it was a sealed stairwell, that it did not exist, and everyone else was bored or cruel or both. He also knew that when he first moved in, he counted the doors on both sides on his way to the far end, then counted the windows from the street, and the numbers did not agree. The landlady, Ms. Whitcomb, waved him off with a thin smile. "Old houses have tricks," she said. "Old carpenters make mistakes." He wanted to believe that, so he did, right up until 11:43 p.m. When someone, somewhere, knocked 3 times and asked to be heard. He walked toward it. The carpet gave a tired sigh under each step. When he got close, he smelled damp earth, like a garden shovel pulled from a hole. He touched the knob. It was cold, colder than any metal should be in a hallway with steam heat hissing from a register. He told himself not to turn it. He told himself to go back, lock his own door, and wait until morning. Then he heard a whisper that was hardly a sound at all. He stood very still. The air felt thinner. The lights flickered as if they were trying not to look. He told himself that words can be imagined, that one voice can be another voice in disguise. The whisper came again, almost kind, almost a hum, drawn out through teeth that did not belong to a face he could picture. He turned the knob. The latch slid back without resistance. The door opened an inch and stopped with a tired groan. A draft slid through the gap and brushed his face. It felt like the first breath from an old cellar, or the mouth of a tunnel that had not seen daylight in a very long time. He raised his lamp. The light reached into the opening and touched nothing. No wall, no shelves, no stored paint cans or broom. The darkness did not behave like a shadow. It looked like a place where light did not live. He shut the door. He locked it. He pressed his palm to the frame and felt a tremor pass through the wood, like something unseen had placed its hand there as well. He walked back down the hall and did not run. He closed his room, turned his own lock, and leaned back against the door with his eyes closed. His heart stuttered against his ribs. He told himself he did the right thing. He told himself that he had not actually opened it at all. Then he noticed the smell of damp soil in his room, and he noticed that the wind had stopped, but the curtains still moved. At 12:07 a.m., the knocks returned. Not at the end of the hall, right behind his head. 3 slow raps on his own door. He shouted that it was late, that he would call the police, that whomever it was had the wrong room. The knock stopped. A soft scrape moved down the bottom edge of the door, like fingers feeling along for a seam. He stayed awake until 3:11 a.m., with the lamp on and the window cracked. He woke hours later with his cheek on the desk and light pushing around the shade, like a gentle threat. He almost convinced himself it was a dream until he saw the scrap of paper pinned under his mug. The paper looked ripped from a notebook. He had no notebook like it. 3 words had been written with a blunt pencil. "You let me." He lifted the note with 2 fingers and felt grit on the bottom, tiny grains that looked like sand from a riverbank. He set it down and felt the house breathe. He decided to go to work early. He turned and found the door to his room, not where he left it. He had left it on the wall that faced the hall. Now the wood stood 2 feet to the right, the door frame had moved with it, the paint edges were clean. The old screw holes that should have shown where the hinges lived were gone. For a long moment, he thought he had simply misjudged the distance. Then he stepped back and saw a pale rectangle of wallpaper that had been spared by some old dresser, and the rectangle no longer lined up with anything. He said his own name out loud, the way someone falling says a word to hear a human sound, and he left for work without breakfast. For a few days, he did not touch the far door. He did not walk to the end of the hall. He took the stairs in the back and left by the kitchen because the front porch swayed under a weight he could not see. He heard stories from the others. Nora, on the first floor, said something brushed her ankle while she folded laundry, and no one else was in the room. Jonah, in the smallest room under the attic, said his alarm clock rang at 2:13 a.m. Every night, even when he unplugged it, and one night when it rang, he felt something cold pass over his face, as if it was testing how he breathed. Ms. Whitcomb said the water bill had doubled and no one had taken longer showers. They said these things with the nervous humor of people who want to hear themselves deny what they fear. By the end of the week, the knocks came on the front door at odd hours. 3 deliberate raps and then silence. A delivery showed up with no return address, 1 box of nails, and a hammer that looked like it had been in a fire. The porch light went out and could not be coaxed back to life. When the postman came, he asked if they had started digging in the yard. He said he could smell wet clay when he dropped the mail, and someone had left a shovel leaning against the porch rail. No one owned a shovel like that. The blade had been ground so thin, it flashed like a mirror when the sun cleared the clouds. At 9:26 p.m. on a Monday, he came home to find the hallway colder than the outside air. He reached his room and saw that his lamp was on and his window had been raised, though he remembered very clearly lowering it before he left. He went in and froze. On his bed, placed on the folded blanket as carefully as a gift, lay an old brass key. The teeth were sharp, the bow worn smooth by long use. There was a tag tied to it with a bit of frayed cord. The tag had 2 words written by the same blunt pencil. For you? He held the key and felt a pressure in his ears, as if he had driven up a mountain without noticing. He knew without any logic that the key would fit the door at the end of the hall. He also knew that the door had not needed a key when he turned it a week ago. He set the key on the desk and told himself he would ignore it. At 10:01 p.m., his light dimmed, not like a line sagging on the grid, but like a hand placed over a mouth. The key slid across the desk with a soft metallic breath and fell into his palm. He went to the hall and walked to the far door before he could give himself a reason not to. He did not want a reason. He wanted the space between the knocks to end. He pressed the key into the lock. The metal welcomed it. He turned his wrist. The tumblers whispered. The door swung inward without sound. The dark inside pulled at the light in the hall. The bulb did not flicker this time. It simply failed, like an eye that refused to look. He held the door with a shaking hand. He raised his lamp and leaned forward. The air smelled like iron and moss. The floor beyond the threshold did not look level. It tilted down and away, not like a staircase, but like a slope, as if the door opened to a place that was beneath the house and also someplace else. He said hello, then winced at the sound of his own voice. The dark answered with a slow rasp. It sounded like breath pulled across brick. He shut the door and locked it with the key and hung the key on a nail above his bed, determined to prove that he was still the one who decided where things belonged. He did not sleep until dawn laid a smudge of gray across the ceiling. He dreamed with his eyes open and saw a field of doors set into the ground like gravestones. In the dream, he walked between them and counted. He could not finish. The field did not end. The next day, he told himself he would leave. He packed a bag with shirts and socks and the metal photo frame of his parents on a motel patio near Lake Erie. He called his friend Victor, who worked nights as a guard at the warehouse, and asked if he could crash on his couch for a few days. Victor said yes, though he sounded worried by the request, and he told Daniel to arrive after midnight when his shift ended. At 7:15 p.m., Daniel turned his lock, shouldered his bag, and stepped into the hall. He saw fresh footprints on the thin carpet, bare footprints, long and wet, moving away from his door and toward the far end. There were no return prints. At the far door, the footprints faded and stopped. The handle was wet. There was no water anywhere else. He left by the back stairs. The alley behind the house held 2 trash cans and the ghost of a vegetable garden that had never taken. The sky threatened more rain. He cut across 2 blocks toward the bus stop. As he walked, he passed a storefront with a narrow display of lamps and secondhand dishes, and in the glass he saw the reflection of the back of his head. Behind his reflection, though, behind the glass, in the store that should have been locked and dark, he saw a door with a tall, thin frame. It stood where no door should be. It stood the way a finger points in reprimand. He did not turn to look. He kept walking and kept his eyes on the gutter where rain gathered and slithered. He took the late bus. He tried to read. The lights in the bus hummed and dipped. A man, 2 seats back, muttered that everyone should sit down and be quiet, even though everyone was already sitting and no one was talking. Daniel got off near the river where the warehouse stood like a row of gray teeth. He waited for Victor by the back entrance under a buzzing yellow light. At 12:02 a.m., the side door opened and Victor waved him in with a quiet nod. They walked past cages stacked with boxes and the whine of a forklift that was bored with its job. Victor asked if he was all right. Daniel said the house felt wrong and he needed a few days away. Victor said he could stay as long as he wanted, that his couch had a good view of a boring wall, and sometimes a boring view could heal things that moved too fast. They reached the small security office. Daniel set his bag down and leaned against the metal desk. Then he heard it again. 3 slow knocks. Not on the warehouse door, not on a wall. From behind the metal cabinet in the office where no door could hide, Victor heard it too. He narrowed his eyes and walked to the cabinet. The sound came again. 3 knocks that rolled down the metal like water. Victor put a hand on the cabinet and yanked it away from the wall. Behind it was nothing but cinder block, cold gray squares, and mortar like dry bones. Victor swore and shoved the cabinet back. He stood still for a long moment, the way a dog stands when it hears something you cannot. Then the office light blinked and came back, and he looked at Daniel and did not smile. They left together at 2:04 a.m. and walked to the parking lot. The river moved like heavy glass. A fog bank drifted near the pilings. Victor drove while Daniel watched the rearview mirror. Streetlights passed in even intervals. On the third light, Daniel realized that each time the car rolled under the glow, he saw a tall black rectangle standing in the reflection, as if a door had been placed behind the back seat and bent the mirror as it passed. He did not look back. He watched the mirror and kept his hands flat on his thighs. Victor lived in a basement apartment under a dentist office on Maple Street. The walk down the short set of steps felt like a dive. The air smelled like coffee grounds and old magazines. The couch faced a small television and a shelf of paperbacks. Daniel sat and tried to slow his breathing. At 3:11 a.m., the sound came from the hallway outside, the simple and terrible shape of 3 knocks, and Victor went to the door with a baseball bat and flung it open. The hallway was empty. A draft slipped over his shoes and ran past Daniel on the couch as if something had been waiting to be invited. Victor shut the door and slid the chain and stood with his mouth open, then walked to the couch and put the bat down and said they would get a priest or a contractor in the morning, he did not care which. Morning did not help. The day stood gray and slack. Victor called a cousin who knew a handyman, who knew a carpenter, who had a story about a walled-up passage in a row house in Reading. The carpenter came at 1:02 p.m. with a belt of tools and a calm face. He listened while Daniel said what he could. He nodded the way people nod when they decide to accept things. They can move toward the part where they fix it. He went to the old boarding house with them. He stood at the end of the second-floor hall and looked at the tall, thin door that waited without impatience. He took a small square of mirror from his pocket and held it in the opening when Daniel turned the key and moved the door a few inches. The carpenter watched the mirror with a still face. The mirror did not show darkness. The mirror did not show anything. It did not show the hall behind them. It stayed blank. He closed the mirror and said that sometimes there are doors that are not doors, sometimes there are holes that were not dug, and sometimes a house is built over something that does not agree. He ran his palm down the frame and felt where the wood had been sanded, then scarred, then sanded again. He said there was an old story in towns like this about a set of steps with 11 risers and a 12th riser made of empty space. People would count and be satisfied, then put a foot down and fall where there was no step. He said there were also stories about men who bricked up their sins and slept sound after, until one night the mortar breathed. He set his bag down and took out a pouch of salt and a small mason line and a chalk plum. He had learned the habit from a mason who drank black coffee at dawn and swore that chalk lines remember the world the way it should be. He hung the plum by the frame, the string shook, the weight turned slow circles and would not settle. He asked for a hammer. Daniel brought the burned one from the porch, untouched since the delivery. The carpenter frowned at the black marks on the handle and did not use it. He used his own. He set 3 screws into the frame and 3 into the door and tied them to the line. He ran salt along the threshold until it looked like surf. He told Daniel to leave the door closed, locked, and tied, and to keep a light burning through the night so he could see if the line broke. He said he would return in the morning with a proper plate and a brace. He said to call if the salt moved. He stepped back and looked weary suddenly, like the room had taken a small bite of him, and he left with a quiet nod. At 2:09 a.m., Daniel woke to a soft hiss. He sat up and saw the salt rolling back from the threshold as if an invisible tide was pulling it inward. The string shook. The screws sang, a tiny metal whine like a sound a child could hear when a television is on. He stood and held the key and did not know what to do. The string snapped with 3 sharp tings. The screws turned. The door eased open, not toward him, but toward the dark that hungrily accepted it. He might have turned and run. He did not. He pressed the door closed with both hands and braced his feet and felt something on the other side pushing back with a slow, patient strength. He said, "Please stop." He did not even know to whom he spoke. The pressure eased. He turned the key. He leaned his forehead against the paint and stayed there until light began to creep around the window shade like a spy. He called the carpenter at 7:04 a.m. The call rang and rang. He left a message and waited. He called again, no answer. At noon, he walked to the corner store to buy coffee and bread and found a small crowd gathered by the alley. A police cruiser sat with its lights quiet but its engine running. 2 officers stood near a man on the ground with a sheet over his chest. The sheet was bright white against his boots that stuck out one end. A neighbor said the man had been found at dawn, stretched out near the dumpster, with a look like a person who left a task unfinished. Daniel felt the world narrow. He asked a woman in a scarf if she knew who it was. She said the man had a belt of tools on the curb. A leather pouch lay beside it with salt in the seams. A plumb bob sat under the bumper of a dirty sedan. Daniel said he needed air and he walked until he could not see the alley anymore. He did not return to the boarding house until evening. The door at the end of the hall waited. His own door stood where it should be now, as if the house had grown tired of the joke. He tried to pack again. He put the key in his pocket and told himself he would toss it into the river on the walk to the bus. As he zipped his bag, the room breathed cold. The window lowered by itself an inch and shut with a soft kiss. The lamp dimmed and brightened and dimmed again. He heard the knock. 3 steady raps, not from the hall, not from his door, but from inside his closet. He opened it with a small sound in his throat that could have been a laugh. The closet smelled like cedar and mothballs. An old coat that belonged to a tenant who never came back brushed his arm. The back of the closet did not hold a wall anymore. It held a tall, thin door, the same shape, the same handle. His head swam. He closed the closet and leaned his back against it and said the words he had read on the note. "You let me." He left that night at 10:27 p.m. He did not turn off the lamp. He did not lock his room. He went down the front steps where the porch sagged and turned left. The street looked longer than it ever had. He reached the corner and stopped. A man stood beneath the big sycamore that tilted over the curb. The man wore a coat that hung like a curtain. He faced away. He lifted a hand without moving his shoulder and knocked gently on the air in front of him. 1, 2, 3. The sound traveled to Daniel as if it had been made on wood near his ear. The man lowered his hand and walked across the street without looking left or right. He moved like a sleepwalker. Daniel took a step back. He went the other direction toward the church, where the lights were always on for a little while after the hour. He did not pray. He sat in the last pew and watched the red exit sign burn like a coal and listened to the building creak as if it also had a spine and a set of tired ribs. The next morning, a city inspector arrived after a call that came from no one they could later identify. He wore a jacket with a seal and carried a clipboard with forms attached by a rusty clip. He walked through the house and looked at wiring and pipes and the water heater that rattled when it started. He reached the second floor. He paused at the end of the hall. He looked at the tall, narrow door as if reading a note in a language he almost remembered. He tried the handle. It did not turn. He wrote something on his form and left. On the way out, he told Ms. Whitcomb that old houses collect strange corners, and sometimes those corners collect a smell, and sometimes the smell is not a real smell but a memory of one. She nodded and smiled with her lips only. When he had gone, she climbed the stairs with a hammer and nails and a square of plywood. She stood at the door and waited. She did not raise the hammer. She walked back to her office and called a number she kept in a small book. No one answered that number either. The days after that did not break into clear pieces. Time smudged. He slept in fits. He saw the key in places he did not leave it. On his pillow, in the sink, inside his shoe like a small tongue. He took it to the river and threw it hard. It struck the water with a plunk that felt too small for the weight it carried. He watched the ripple widen and then close like a wound. He walked home and found the key sitting on his desk with the cord tied into a neat bow, as if someone with patient fingers had waited years to learn such a simple knot. Victor stopped by at 8:31 p.m. with 2 coffees and a man from his church who read quietly from a small book and asked to walk through the house with them. The man did not announce anything. He did not demand or command. He listened. He stood in the hall at the far door and said the place felt like a mouth pressed shut. He walked to the basement. The basement had a low ceiling and a strip of dirt floor near the far wall, where an old support post sank like a stake. The man crouched and touched the dirt and rose with a look of distant thought. He said he did not think the house was haunted in the simple way people like to say. He thought the house had been built over a path, like a country lane that had once run from one field to another. The lane did not end when the field was plowed. It kept going under what came after. He said some paths want travelers, some doors want to be used. He said someone long ago had opened a door here and did not shut it correctly. He said someone had tried to build a wall where a door did not want to be. He said none of this was about belief. It was about the shape of a wound and the way it will not close if a piece of it is missing. He asked Daniel what he had heard first. A knock, Daniel said. 3 knocks. The man nodded. He said 3 knocks are polite. They are the old way. They mean a traveler is asking permission. He said the worst thing you can do is open the door when the traveler has asked, and you do not know who it is. If you open, you become a host. If you refuse, the traveler goes on. He looked at Daniel with eyes that had watched factory smoke for years and said that sometimes the host does not know he has become one until the first guest is already in the kitchen. That night, Daniel tried to follow orders. He placed the key in a bowl of salt. He drew a line of chalk across the threshold of his room and across the far door. He set a chair under the knob. He sat and waited. At 1:03 a.m., the chair slid quietly aside and settled a foot away, as if a careful hand had pushed it and did not want to scratch the floor. The chalk line broke without footsteps crossing it. The key rose an inch in the bowl and rested again as if nodding. The door in the hall did not move. The closet door inside his room did. He heard a breath, slow and deliberate, in a space that could not hold anyone. The breath did not rush. It took its time. It sounded like a tide that had finally decided which way it meant to go. He left a recording on his phone for whoever might come next. He spoke into the small microphone with his voice pulled tight. He said he was sorry for whatever he had done, even if all he had done was turn the knob of a door in a hallway that should have been boring. He said he did not believe in curses. He said he believed in mistakes. He said he felt like a man who had signed a contract written in invisible ink. He left the phone on the desk with the recording playing on repeat, like a small litany. In the morning, the landlady knocked on his room and called his name. He did not answer. She opened the door and stepped in and felt a chill ripple her skirt. The lamp was on, the bed was unmade. The phone on the desk whispered the last line of his recording over and over in a thin loop. I did not mean to let you in. The closet stood open 2 inches. The far door at the end of the hall stood open a foot. A line of damp soil ran from the far door to the closet and stopped dead at the sill. The bowl of salt sat empty with a faint ring near its lip, as if something with many small hands had taken its measure. The police came and did what police do. They cataloged, they measured, they took photographs that flattened the room into rectangles and squares. Officer Nolan walked down to the basement and stared at the strip of dirt and came back up and wrote that the ground smelled like a place beside a river after a flood. He stood by the far door and looked into the dark that did not show the hall reflected in his pupils, and he decided to step away. The report said missing person. The report said no sign of forced entry. The report said the tenant had been under stress. The report did not say that Nolan woke that night at 3:11 a.m. in his own home to the sound of 3 polite knocks that came from inside the linen closet, and he lay still until the knocks moved on like a traveling show. Weeks passed without weeks passing at all. A new tenant toured the building and said he liked old wood and cheap rent. He took Daniel's room. He lasted 3 nights. He left a note under the rent box that said sorry and 2 jackknives on the table as if the color of their handles had been a promise he wanted to keep. A woman who taught at the middle school moved into Nora's old space and smiled at the stairwell like an actress who believes in second chances. She told a colleague that the house hummed like a distant generator even when the power was steady. She told no one that her alarm shifted to 2:13 a.m. and stayed there no matter how she set it. She left during a rain on a Tuesday afternoon with a single backpack and a plant under her arm that shook as if a breeze was in the hall, but there was no breeze in the hall. The landlady started to sleep on a cot in the office downstairs because the phones rang without calls, and she decided she would rather be the first to hear than the last. She opened the ledger and ran a finger down the old page where the house deeds were copied out for no good reason except that someone had liked the look of handwriting. She found an entry about a previous owner who had poured concrete in the crawl space and then broken it up with a sledge when the water would not run right. She found another entry about a boarder who spoke to the wall in the laundry room and said the wall spoke back with a voice like a voice in a metal pipe. She closed the ledger and told herself stories about plumbing and air and a bad memory that walks in circles. At dawn, she raised the blinds and found a small brass key on the windowsill with a tag that said, "For you." She went very still and did not touch it until noon when she put on a pair of gloves and used 2 fingers to flick it into the trash. She took the trash out to the can and set the lid and walked inside and locked the back door. When she returned to the office, the key sat on the desk with the cord in a new bow that no one had tied. On a night with a clear sky and a slow moon, a group of teenagers dared one another to throw pebbles at the boarding house and run. They stood under the sycamore and whispered the way teenagers do. They were not cruel. They only wanted to feel their hearts rise. They crept along the fence and raised their arms, and at that exact moment, a soft knocking sound came from the fence itself. 3 polite raps that carried the texture of wood, though the fence was iron. They broke and ran. All but one who stood with his mouth open like a fish, because at the end of the second-floor hall, a door was open, and in the dark behind it, a figure stood. The figure looked tall, but also wrong, as if the lines of the body had been drawn with a rule that did not match the human sketch. The figure raised a hand, the knock came again. The boy ran so fast, he left his shoes. A year did not pass, because we will not count years. The house gathered dust in the places no one cleaned. The porch leaned a little more. The door at the end of the second-floor hall sometimes stood ajar for no one, and sometimes closed itself with a courtesy that felt like a joke. When a storm rolled up the valley, the house held its breath, and the lights in the kitchen flickered and stilled, And for a moment, the hum of the refrigerator showed its true note, and you could hear the shape of something that had been here longer than wires or motors or rain. Detective Reed, who was older than his haircut and younger than his eyes, stopped by every few months to ask if anyone had heard from the missing tenant. He stood at the foot of the stairs and looked like a man waiting for a train that would never come to this platform. He took notes that he did not keep. He asked the same questions. He did not ask about doors. One day, he sat alone in his sedan outside the house and watched the second floor windows for an hour. At 3:11 p.m., when the street was quiet and a dog barked twice and then thought better of it, he saw a shape slide past the far window and pause. The shape did not move like a shadow made by a person. It moved like the afterimage in your eye when you stare at a light and then look away. He started the engine and drove to the municipal lot and sat with his head in his hands until the sensation passed that a set of steps was missing beneath his feet and he would fall if he tried to stand. There are people who believe they are too practical to be lost. They do not understand that a path that runs under a house has no use for belief. The door at the end of the hall is still there. Most days it is only wood and paint, holding the quiet air of a staircase that does not exist. Some nights it is not only wood. On those nights, the hallway feels longer than it did at noon. The bulb burns with a halo. The carpet nap looks pressed in the shape of feet that stood and waited. When you stand there, if you are foolish enough to stand there, you will feel the air lean toward you. It will feel like the moment a stranger steps too close on a bus. Polite and invasive at the same time. You will hear nothing at first. Then you will hear 3 knocks. Then you will hear a voice that speaks like a man who will not raise his voice because he does not need to. People who live far away will say that doors do not work that way. They will say a story is a way for a house to make sense of its creaks. They will say a man named Daniel had a bad week and made a bad choice and then made another. They will be right and wrong in equal measure. What is true is this: he should have never opened that door. He did anyway. He did a simple thing, and the world made of wood and light and time turned a few quiet degrees. We do not always see the turn. We feel it. We wake at 2:13 a.m. because an old clock in an old place has decided that is the right time for a soft hand to try a knob. We hear 3 knocks that are polite because the old ways are more patient than we are. We tell ourselves to ignore them. We do. We do not. We stand up and walk to the hall and place our fingers on a piece of metal that is colder than it should be, and we turn and we learn that some doors do not open into rooms, they open into unfinished invitations. On certain quiet mornings, the landlady pauses at the mailboxes and believes she hears someone at the end of the hall speaking very softly. She thinks she hears a man apologizing. She thinks she hears him say he did not mean to be a host. She stands very still and swallows, and the sound goes away. She does not tell anyone. She checks the keys on the hook. There is one more key than there should be. She does not touch it. She turns the sign on the front door to no vacancy, even when she has 2 rooms free. She tells herself it is for safety. She tells herself that boarding houses work best when they are a little empty. She tells herself that one day she will take a hammer to that far door and break it into a pile of obedient boards. She tells herself many things. At 11:43 p.m., on nights when the rain moves sideways, she hears 3 slow knocks and looks up from her chair, and for a second, one small second that stretches, she thinks she will answer. If you visit Ashwood Drive and you stand under the sycamore and you look at the second floor window at the end of the hall, you might see nothing but the tired curtains sagging inward as if the house is swallowing. Or you might see a thin line darker than the rest, the seam of a door that is not quite shut. You might hear a knock, even if there is no wood within reach. You will be tempted to knock back. People are tempted by small rituals. Do not do it. Walk away while you can, walk to the corner, and do not look at your reflection in the storefront glass. If you do, you may notice a tall black rectangle standing where no door should be, and you may learn the trick too late. The trick is not that the door follows you. The trick is that once you have opened it, there is no place left where it is not. The house stands and waits. The train still calls with its low horn. The porch light still fails and returns when it wants. People still move in and out with boxes and hope. They tell one another that every town has a story like this. They say the names wrong and get the times mixed up. None of that matters. The rhythm is what matters. 3 slow knocks, a pause, 3 more. The whisper that sounds like breath pulled across brick. The cold metal of a knob at the end of a short walk that can take the rest of your life. The way a man speaks at the edge of a choice and thinks he has time to think. The way a door waits forever and never gets tired. He should have never opened that door. He did. And now, on certain nights, when the air is wet and the street is quiet and the hum of the wires makes your teeth buzz, you can stand very still and you will feel it. The world has a seam in it. Someone is on the other side of that seam with their knuckles raised, and they are polite, and they are patient, and they are calling on anyone who still believes a door is only wood